Good afternoon. My name is Ashok Goyal. I'm the editor of AI Magazine, and it is my pleasure to introduce Stephen Smith to you. Steve is the winner of the Robert Engelmore Award for 2018. This award is for his sustained research excellence in constraint-based planning and scheduling technologies, deployment of those technologies to a range of significant real-world problems, and extensive service to the AI community that includes significant outreach to related technical fields. On behalf of the AI Magazine and AAAI, Steve, we recognize you as the winner of the 2018 Robert Engelmore Award.
Thank you. Well, it's my great honor to have this award. Bob was one of the pioneers in building AI systems, and it's great to be able to follow in his footsteps. So my group, for the last 7-8 years now, have been focusing in an area, application area, we now come to refer to as smart infrastructure for urban mobility. Started out with, we got an opportunity to work to try out some of the work we've been doing in multi-agent planning in the area of real-time traffic signal control, and it's kind of gone from there. That's what I'm going to talk to you about. You know, it's an area that is becoming increasingly important. I mean, you know, if you look throughout the world these days, people are moving to cities, and cities are becoming more and more congested. The trends are that that's going to continue, you know. People are moving to the cities to live, and you know, when you think about quality of life, equity of opportunity, economic prosperity, all that mobility is all central to that. And central to mobility is an ability to kind of move through the city in traffic signals. What we'd like as traffic flow is to move to minimize bottlenecks. We'd like traffic signal control to minimize bottlenecks and maximize throughput. That's not really what happens today, but so that's what I'll be talking about. So what I'll do is I'll spend a couple minutes talking about traffic signals and traffic signal control problem. Then I'll relate it to or think of it as a traffic control as a distributed online planning problem, which is the approach we're taking. I'll describe the experiences we've had in the field, and then talk about some more recent developments, and in particular, work we've been doing to integrate with connected vehicle technology as it comes along down the pike, and go from there. So, in a word, you know, intersections are incredibly unintelligent at this point. You know, particularly if you look at urban environments, which is where we've really been focused. Traffic signals really haven't changed in 50 years. They unnecessarily disrupt traffic flows. You know, there's lots of evidence of that. Let's see. You know, congestion in U.S. cities is kind of a recent, every year they do this mobility study, and every year the numbers get bigger, but it's now, I think, $160 billion is spent annually in U.S. cities in time lost and fuel spent in sort of commuting day to day. Another study says that drivers spend, typically on urban surface streets, spend 40% of their time idling in traffic. So these are not good statistics. And they, as I said, they get worse every year. The main reason for that is that one main reason for that is that traffic signals are programmed fundamentally for average conditions. Typically, a traffic engineer will go out, take snapshots of counts, what vehicle volumes are turning for a day or two, and then based on that snapshot, we'll build a plan, a timing plan, a plan for allocating green to different directions, install that in the intersection, and then that plan will run in a fixed conventional way forever and ever. So average conditions differ quite dramatically from actual conditions, And moreover, we don't live in a static world. Traffic is continually evolving. New construction, new development, things change. So these plans quickly age. And again, the idea, or I guess the traffic engineer would say that you need to spend time retiming signals, maybe every once or 1 or 2 years, depending on the growth or whatever. In Pittsburgh, just as an example, the downtown traffic signals were last retimed in 2000, I think. So that's like 18 years ago. So, it costs money to do that, so you just don't do it. In the meantime, we've seen over the last couple years, or last several years, this sort of rise in sensing. There's ubiquitous sensing around everywhere now. There's lots of opportunities to get data and use data to manage traffic in intelligent ways. But as I was saying before, really this hasn't changed. Traffic signals haven't changed at all. As new video cameras and radar, new kinds of sensing technologies are incorporated, but they're still used in the same mundane ways they would have been used 50 years ago. They point them right down, figuratively point them right down at the intersection, detect cars that are waiting at an intersection after they've already stopped, and then in the best case reacting to that. So we're interested in doing something better than that. So what is the problem? Here's a diagram, sort of the artifact, the plan that we're after here, a traffic signal plan is called a timing plan. I've drawn a little, a standard intersection there with a set of arrows that sort of indicate different vehicle movements. Typically, these movements are grouped into compatible phases, movement phases, and then the idea of building the act of building a timing plan is really one of expressing a sequence of movement phases to move in order here. So, for example, 2.6 is east-west, 4.8 is north-south. You've got turning lanes, and the key idea here is how long each phase is going to be. You notice here in this diagram that the sequence tends to repeat itself, and this is very commonly the case that the phases will turn in the same sequence. It doesn't have to be the case, but there's an element of confusion if you go on. As we go along, we'll make that same assumption. So that's the artifact that we'll be trying to generate. And, as I said just a minute ago, conventional signal systems are pre-programmed. You build this plan in advance. The amount of time given to a given phase never changes, and it runs. Adaptive signal systems, on the other hand, we're going to be sensing approaching traffic and then dynamically adjusting the timing plans in real time. So adaptive signal systems is not a new idea. It's been around for probably 40 years. There are different classes of systems. The systems that have had the most success, as I've said here, are ones that sort of manipulate parameters of a timing plan. So if you think of a template for a timing plan, a couple things you could monitor or vary over time would be the split, the amount of time you give to each direction, the overall duration of the cycle, or the offset in time between one intersection and the next. Most adaptive signal systems tend to operate in that kind of a fashion, and they also operate in a centralized fashion. So you observe traffic through detection in real time, but you pull that traffic back to some central location, integrate data over time, and then make adjustments to these parameters, maybe on the order of 5-10 minutes, every 5-10 minutes. So from a real-time perspective, they can be pretty limiting. If you're, the dynamics of traffic is changing rapidly, these are not going to be effective. Another class of systems that have appeared, they haven't had as much success, online intersection planning approaches. these naturally do focus on the real-time problem, and they also extend very naturally, if you think of them in a decentralized way, to the network level problem. So the approach we're taking actually would fall into this category. The problem historically has been the computational requirements of computing plans in real time or fast enough to keep pace with execution. And that's really the key innovation behind our work that really has allowed us to make inroads here, is we were able to compute. We have a formulation of the intersection control problem that allows us to compute very rapidly. There is a third kind of system that if I, in fact, know the dominant flow, then I can take advantage of that and sort of implement a shared plan, and then my adaptive problem becomes just one of managing side streets. So this is kind of, you know, if you think of suburban arterials or corridors where you've got shopping malls on the sides, things like that, that kind of technology can be very effective in those cases. There has been work in AI, in traffic, several different approaches. Some early work by Anna Bazan looked at using reinforcement learning as a way of tracking traffic and moving. More recently, there's a Marlin system that developed at the University of Toronto that takes a similar kind of perspective. The difficulty with this kind of approach from our perspective is it's not really real time. It takes reinforcement learning kinds of approaches it takes time to adapt, and if you're trying to respond to situations like an event ending and garages clearing out where you have, like, you know, a certain traffic pattern for about 15 minutes and then it shifts again, by the time you kind of get in a cat chasing its tail kind of situation. Peter Stone, on the other hand, has been working in this area for quite a while. He really approached it, he and his group are approaching it more from the perspective of automated vehicles and what could we do in a world where there are no pedestrians, for example, and all the cars are automated. You know, so his focus more on reservation-based approaches. There's been some recent work by Scott Safier and his colleagues in a new formulation, mixed integer programming formulations for network optimization, which kind of really are a nice academic breakthrough, but still are really not are going to be more for use in kind of static analysis ahead of time. And then there's also been some recent work on PDL-based planning that, in this case, generating signal timings with the PDL-based formulation of the problem, in particular in responding to congestion. So, our approach, system we've been evolving over the last several years, is a system called Suretrack. We focus, as I said, on real-time optimization of urban road networks. Urban road networks are more complex than corridors in the sense that we're really looking at problems where you have multiple competing flows that change over the day, change over time. So you really can't rely on knowing what the dominant flow is at any point in time, but the system really has to discover it and keep rediscovering it over time. So we take a collaborative online planning approach. Each intersection locally optimizes its own situation, and then intersections communicate to achieve coordinated activity. Coordinated action is sort of the progression of green flows if all traffic is moving in that direction. Here's a concept of operations for how the Suretrack system works. So basically, we put a computer at every intersection, which I've labeled as the intersection scheduler there. It's observing the approaching traffic through its local sensors and building a predictive model of when it expects all vehicles in all directions to be actually arriving at the intersection. Once it does that, then it computes in real time a phase schedule, a timing plan that will move all the traffic that it sees through its sensing through the intersection in the most efficient way. Once it builds that plan, it starts sending commands to the hardware controller to actually execute, and then it also communicates to its downstream neighbors what traffic it expects to be sending their way. So downstream neighbors doing the same thing, building its local plan, but now in addition to the traffic it sees through its local sensors, it has an expectation of what's coming down the pike behind it. So it can build a longer horizon plan. And that's really the key, this ability to rapidly build long horizon plans that is what allows us to get our network level optimization. And then with each intersection repeats this cycle every couple seconds. So it's very real time. The fact that we're recomputing so frequently is sort of a correction for uncertainty in the detection and so forth. So there really are two key technical ideas that sort of underlie this work. The first is this formulation. We formulate the intersection control problem as a special kind of single machine scheduling problem. We develop an aggregate representation, so we don't we take the detection of individual vehicles and we aggregate them into clusters, and then it's those aggregate entities that we move through the intersection. You know, they are the jobs that the intersection the machine is processing, basically. And then, as I was just mentioning a moment ago, once we build a schedule, each time we build a schedule, we communicate what we expect to be sending downstream. So that gives the downstream neighbors visibility of input jobs. So looking at this a little bit more closely, here's suppose this is a detected traffic stream approaching a signal on the left. And we do two kinds of aggregation. We first do an aggregation just simply based on the proximity of vehicles. So if I've got vehicles in close proximity together, I'll group them into a platoon, and then I'll manage that platoon in a non-preemptive way. Secondly, we also aggregate vehicles according to this notion of an anticipated queue. You know, oftentimes we'll have vehicles already sitting at the intersection waiting to move through. An anticipated queue is just an augmentation of that we compute what vehicles are actually going to get to the intersection before the queue will clear, and then they become part of the queue. So once we have those sort of aggregate chunks, then the scheduling problem is just one of sequencing the clusters that are moving in different incompatible ways. So here, let's suppose this is a simple case here where you have two one-way flows, north and west, let's say. We've got clusters approaching in both directions. Build a schedule by just putting a sequence together. And once we have a sequence, then we can extract from that sequence a signal timing plan, a precise, fixed time for changes. So then the scheduling problem simply becomes is just to minimize the cumulative. This is the objective function we're doing now. Minimize the cumulative delay of all jobs, subject to the timing constraints for both safety and fairness. So typically, you always, if you're changing phases, you always need a intergreen time, a yellow time, a red time for safety purposes, and then typically you'll associate minimum and maximum times to ensure that nobody gets starved out. So we solve this problem with forward dynamic programming search. I guess the interesting thing to notice here with this formulation is that the time complexity becomes now a function of the number of phases and the number of clusters, as opposed to the number of time ticks, which has been the historical model that others have used, and allows us to kind of get orders of magnitude speed up over what's been done before. I've mentioned already this idea of communicating outflows to downstream neighbors. Just some properties of this: we only communicate with direct neighbors, so we're to remain scalable, but it's important to note that since we compute so often, information. It can move multiple hops. It just takes successive movements. This is what it looks like, the setup looks like in the field. We put a computer at every intersection. I didn't notice this until I got into it, but you can always find a box, a cabinet around the intersection. So at the very bottom of that cabinet is a little commodity hardened, weather hardened computer that we put in the cabinet to run our system. It's connected to the hardware controller, which is the piece of hardware at the very top of the cabinet. And then in between there are video processing boards that we're also connected to receive the detection. In this particular intersection, we're using video cameras. You can see one at the very top of the street light, at the very top. And we also need communication to our neighbors. So in this case, we're using commercial IP radios. A lot of places in urban areas, it's fiber optic cable is already in place, and that's the ideal. Here's, let's see if I can get this to go. This is just a side-by-side comparison at one of the original intersections. People in Pittsburgh don't really drive that fast. It's sped up. But you know, just to kind of give you a gestalt of how, so on the left is, you know, we videotaped for about 15 minutes with it off and then turned it on. You can kind of get a feeling. You know, it's not, you can also see it's not a panacea. It's not like nobody ever stops, but you get a much better overall flow. We first installed the system in, or I guess field tested the system in June of 2012 on a 9 intersection grid a couple miles from campus. To evaluate performance, what we did these physical drive-through experiments where we sort of picked the 11 or 12 heaviest volume routes and drove, you know, with a GPS device on our cell phone to track and from that compute travel statistics to see what the trade-offs would be. And you can see that we get different amounts of improvement at different periods of the day. We drove for, you know, multiple periods in the day, multiple days, and so forth. So, but overall, you can see that we've got pretty strong improvement, 26% reduction in average travel times through the network. Not so much because vehicles are moving faster, but they're stopping 30% fewer times, and when they do stop, they are idling 40% less time. So pretty nice. On the strength of those results, we got some, we were able to get additional funding to expand the network, and in November of 2013, the next year, we doubled the size of the network to 18, sort of moving east through Bakery Square, an area where Google Pittsburgh is. It's an emerging high-tech area. We did the same experiment. You can see we didn't get exactly the same results, but basically we got essentially the same results. We've since expanded it a couple times since then, and the current Pittsburgh deployment is an adaptive corridor that, so where we started in the purple in the middle, it sort of now runs from the eastern end of Pittsburgh, the border for Wilkinsburg, through East Liberty, and then down into a neighboring neighborhood of Oakland. City of Pittsburgh has gotten funding finalized last year to implement a larger vision that they have, and part of that central to that vision is adding 150 more intersections. So this is now going through a company that we've formed, a company called Rapid Flow. But so if all goes well in the next 3 years, we'll have about a third of the intersections in Pittsburgh, I guess, that will be running. We've also started pushing the technology out into, you know, further into the field or to other cities. In September, we went live at 24 intersections in Atlanta as part of a North Avenue corridor smart cities project. And we have 4 or 5 contracts well, 4 or 5 contracts for 2018 and we're negotiating with a number of other cities. So things are going well there. On the research side, we've some of the more recent work that we've done. I have a student, Hushay, who's been looking at a particular problem that we've encountered, as we've watched the system run in different circumstances. But basically, trying to cope with the issue of network saturation. So, obviously, if you have more vehicles on the road than the capacity, eventually nothing you can do is going to work. But you can delay that. Cusp, and also, as you approach saturation, sort of the best thing you can do is manage queues. So what Hushay has done is sort of integrated the idea of measurement of queues and sort of recognizing a certain saturation point, and in that case, shifting to more of a queue management kind of strategy. It trivially gives you performance guarantees that you can't grow the network or grow the queues unbounded, which is a good feature, I guess. But if you think about it, it makes a lot of sense. We're taking a schedule-driven approach. So we're building these plans based on schedules. And if you think of as the traffic starts to reach saturation in the extreme, what we're going to end up with is one cluster in each direction. So we're no longer solving a scheduling problem. We're solving a problem of when to cut the clusters. So it makes very much sense. And just got a graphic here of some simulation results that he achieved with a simulation model of part of the network in Pittsburgh. And you can see it does give us the desired effect. It really has no impact in low or medium demands, but as we get to high demand kind of situations, there's a significant positive effect. So that has since been transferred into the field, and we're running with that. A second student of mine, Rick Goldstein, is working with a technique we're calling expressive real-time intersection scheduling, but he's been focused on really expanding the precision of the predictive model of scheduling that you're using to schedule, specifically extending it to the level of lane-based flow models and consideration of individual directions. I skipped over these details in presenting the basic idea, but in the basic formulation that we have in the field now, we basically take compatible flows and fold the flows into one, basically, and there's a lot of room for opportunity for further optimization if you don't do that, and that's what Rick's kind of done. So he's actually talking about this work tomorrow afternoon, so I'll put in a plug for everyone to go listen to his talk here. It's a good idea. One other major focus that we've had in recent years has been integration of our real-time technology with this emerging connected vehicle technology that's coming down the road. In the long term, if you can imagine a future where all vehicles are connected, and by that I just mean these are the radios that are going to go into cars. They were slated to start going into cars this year. Current administration has slowed that down a little bit, but they will eventually, and they allow the vehicles to communicate directly with the intersection, with the traffic signal control system. So if you think of it as a sensing technology, if once you've got a certain level of penetration, it's going to be much better sensing technology than what we have now with video cameras and radar or whatever. Right now we're operating with snapshots. We pull a snapshot of the approaching traffic from the video camera every once in a while, whenever we're ready to compute, and then we do it. Here we get, the idea here, the basic application for these radios is safety. So each vehicle emits a signal every 1/10 of a second that says, here's my location, here's my heading, here's my speed. So you've got essentially continuous information about where the vehicle is, or as fine a granularity as you can deal with. And so in the longer term, that's really going to be a tremendous payoff. What we've really been looking at is what we might be able to do in the shorter term, where the level of penetration is not too high, is there anything you can do to both incentivize adoption of this kind of technology and take advantage of it? And it turns out there are a couple of things that are pretty interesting. One of the things we're doing, we're working with the Port Authority of Allegheny County in Pittsburgh to actively equip buses with these radios, and actively manage them, essentially know that we've got a bus approaching and be able to use that information to do a better job of moving traffic through. Buses are big, are big objects that do a lot of congesting. Here's a picture in Pittsburgh, like a lot of eastern cities, the bus stops are right before the intersection, the near side, and when they stop, lots of times everybody else stops as well. So, so if you can do a good job of moving buses through, we've been able to do. We spent some work. I don't have a slide on it, but we spent some time developing a fairly predictable way to predict bus dwell times at intersections. And so coupling that information with the ability to kind of in real time know a bus is approaching, we can already just get a much more accurate picture of when the bus is going to get to the intersection. So even without doing anything bias to the bus, we can still, I think, improve the throughput and move them through just by having better information. But what we really, in the longer term, there's a lot of other interesting information on the bus that's on the bus that we can take advantage of. We're able to know when the doors open and close, how full the bus is, et cetera. So all that information could be taken into account to push them along. There are what are called transit priority systems that are out there in the world. But they fundamentally give all the priority to the bus, and the rest of the traffic suffers. So, and very often those systems are in the control of the bus driver. So the bus driver is really not interested in the rest of the traffic that's moving around the intersection. But anyway, so another interesting thing that we've been able to show in simulation, we're building a field implementation now, is that if we've been able to show that if equipped vehicle is willing to share its route with us, with the intersection, everybody uses navigation devices. If you just pump that to the intersection, we can immediately get that vehicle through our network substantially faster, like 20–30% faster on average. And we're not doing that at the expense of any other vehicles. It's just a matter of we're getting more information. We're squeezing uncertainty out of the optimization problem. So, and as says a couple of very interesting things, as more and more vehicles get equipped, the whole performance of the network is going to rise. It also kind of gives an incentive to be an early adopter. You can be expedited. So, imagine you're, I don't know, first last mile freight company, and, you know your routes through the city. If you're willing to equip your vehicles, then already you can improve your operations. Ride-hailing companies the same way. So there are lots of opportunities for that. I'll come back to that point at the end because the more and more as we become connected, as the transportation network becomes connected, the intersection is going to be a gateway. Another thing that another project that my group is currently working on with federal highway funding is equipping. The idea is it's dealing with pedestrian communication with the infrastructure, but basically promoting safe intersection crossing for pedestrians, in this case pedestrians with disabilities. So the basic concept is to develop a DSRC-based smartphone app that will allow pedestrians with disabilities to communicate directly with the signal system. Which allows, in the simplest case, the device can be personalized, so it can learn your crossing constraints, how fast you travel, and communicate those to the intersection along with your crossing directions. So the immediate application, the simple application, is just to ensure that when you do get the green, you're going to have enough time to cross. Since the device has GPS tracking capability, we can also monitor the progress, track progress, and since we're have control of the signal system, we can, if we notice that pedestrians are moving behind schedule, so to speak, we can take steps to dynamically extend the green time. So those are the basic safety applications that we're focusing on first, but there are also opportunities for enhanced mobility. So one of the things that pedestrians with disabilities a lot of pedestrians with disabilities are very diligent about is doing route planning ahead of time, and there are a lot of apps out there now that allow you to plan your path. Say you're going to another part of town, so you need to plan a path to the bus stop and so forth, and move through there. And just like vehicles, if a pedestrian is willing to share its route with us, we can take that into account in the general optimization and anticipate their arrival and streamline their movements. So. So that's that's one thing we can do. Also, sort of by virtue of the fact that or a common trip is to a bus with a particular bus route, we can take advantage of the fact that we're connected to the buses and know what routes are arriving when and that they're arriving in the proximity of the intersection to help synchronize that kind of. Synchronize the meeting of the pedestrian and the bus. So these are the kind of the ideas that we're pushing, but we actually also see this as perhaps a more general way to cope with pedestrian traffic. One of the biggest challenges in urban traffic control is detection. It's not that there aren't technologies out there that can detect pedestrians, but at least at this point in time, they're a different device than the technology that's used to detect vehicles. That'll change over time, I think, but at the present time, that's not the case. So, and municipalities will rarely invest the extra money. They don't want the extra equipment to maintain and so forth. The fact that the proliferation of cell phones, smartphones. There's some challenges in trying to ensure that incentive compatibility, let's say, but I think they can be overcome, and if you can get an honest read from pedestrian traffic movement, that'd be a tremendous source of. We could take advantage of pedestrian data, blend them in with our our vehicle traffic flows today if we could detect them. So that's one thing that I think in the longer term, maybe there's an opportunity here for this. Our current prototype of this device is it turns out that, well, there is no DSRC-based cell phone or smartphone in existence today. But what one of the DSRC company makes is what's called a mobile sleeve. There's a picture of it there on the left. Essentially what it attaches to attaches to a cell phone. And you can kind of get a sense of the general size. So this is what we're using as a prototype. Kind of clunky, but the idea really is that if we prove out this technology and it proves to be something that's effective and commercially, then in 2 years from now, we'll have a much better sense of the technology landscape. Right now, there's a big debate of whether DSRC or 5G is going to win the day for connectivity, and so we can do that. But at this point, we have a device that supports the basic safety application, and we're working to add monitoring to that. A fourth area, I guess, that we're working in is ubiquitous sensing. We actually, this through my company, we're focused on low-cost Bluetooth sensing as a way of gathering real-time traffic information. We as we're running, as our real-time system, adaptive system is running, are collecting information about traffic flows, but we aren't getting information about vehicle trajectories and things like that. So the original idea was to try to use this kind of sensing as a way of detecting vehicle trajectories in real time, and then using that, our longer term objective there is to use that as a way of doing real time incident detection. Once I have an ability to compute traffic statistics, general flows, then I can ascribe sort of base conditions and look for discontinuities and so forth. Recognize things like traffic accidents or even I don't know, a street segment that's been closed for a couple of weeks. Maybe they're digging up the pipes or something like that under the ground. What happened in the meantime, as we started working on this, is that we got an opportunity to do another application, which we've been following up on, which is detecting congestion that's due to vehicles cruising around for on-street parking. So, as cities are starting to go these sort of dynamic pricing kinds of models of traffic, they like to, the first step is kind of getting information about where the pricey ticket parking should be, I guess. We have used the same idea, basically, the same underlying computation to recognize a number of patterns indicative of cruising for parking, and we do have a deployment of it's in the picture there, the 59 intersections in downtown Washington D.C. that is part of a Park D.C. project and they seem to be happy with the results, so that's good. Yeah. But our ultimate idea really is, that once we can detect incidents, things like that, then we can really provide capability for real-time routing. So this is another direction that we'd like to go. If you think about it, the plans that we're building in real time, they're distributed through the network, but they're by far the best prediction of what's going to happen in the next immediate horizon, say 5 minutes. If vehicles are connected and kind of tracking as they go along, you know, we can provide feedback on information about incidents and congestion and generally to any vehicles that are interested in taking it. So, so that's another opportunity that that we're looking for. You know, more generally, we really feel that as connected vehicle technology proliferates and you know, and behind that automated vehicles come on, that increasingly it's going to be the intersection that really is the gateway of real-time information. And so there's really a tremendous number of opportunities to for congestion mitigation through the kinds of things I'm talking about: online analysis of network performance, incident detection, rerouting, those kinds of things. You know, if you looked at the self-driving car manufacturers these days, I mean, everybody's these days is focused on the vehicle and you know, on its ability to move safely and effectively through its environment, and as they should be. But you know, when autonomous vehicles sort of take over the roadways, it may well be that we can eliminate traffic signals, but we'll never really eliminate the need for traffic infrastructure. You know, there'll have to be something there. I mean, if anything, you know, all the Ubers and Lyfts on the road are just going to create more congestion. And in a lot of ways, there are more opportunities with automated vehicles. You know, robots take direction a little bit better than humans a lot of times, so there's good opportunity. Anyway, I think the you know, smart infrastructure is going to be a key, and excited to be working in this field. So thank you. I did want to just mention my group. I have a tremendous group I've been working with, and they're the ones that really get things done. So I'll be glad to take questions if there are any.
Yeah. So while you're waiting for the connected vehicle technology to proliferate, have you thought about what you might be able to do if you had access to the kind of data for real-time vehicle routing that Google has through its Google Maps and Waze and so on? And you know, what could you do with that? And how could you even get it, even if they don't want to give it to you? Could you incentivize drivers to download your app, you know, on the basis that you can route them faster and so on? Yeah. And conversely, have you thought about making some of the data that you're collecting open? So whether it's the raw data or your scheduling plans, so that third parties like Google and smaller startups could take advantage of that to provide services for drivers.
Yeah, I answer the second part first. Definitely, we see more in the short term that you know, if we're able to do things like incident detection, that we would, you know, we'd be very open to be pushing that data to, you know, third parties like Waze or Google Maps or any of that. We feel that in the immediate future, or I mean, in the immediate future horizon, that our information is going to be better than what we can get from those kinds of apps. On the other hand, if we had access to that data, they're starting to get more into urban areas. But what I was going to say is we could certainly make use of that information to refine and continually even adapt some of the parameters that we use in our model. You know, so we have notions of free flow speed, for example, that you know, depend on congestion levels and things like that. So we could do a lot with origin to destination information that you would get there. We're in fact doing an experiment right now, or talking about doing an experiment with Lyft, getting some of their data for a city and seeing the kinds of things we could do with that. So. Yeah.
Hey, Steve.
Hi,
great talk. Bob would have really loved the application. Just had a question that doesn't have much to do with AI, but I mean, you probably are an expert on this by now. I've noticed that in many countries of the world, perhaps a majority, a yellow light appears not just between red and green, but between green and red, but between red and green. Right. And also in some countries, they're starting to have traffic lights which show the exact amount of time of each cycle, you know, within the thing. I was wondering if those had any real effect on either safety or traffic flow, whether you'd experimented at all with those additions to this type of system?
Well, right. So we would have to take those constraints into account, which would change. One thing that we have spent a bit of time with recently that we had trouble with at the beginning is calibrating with the pedestrian countdowns, because fundamentally, if you're a real-time adaptive system, you don't really know when you're going to end. So what we've ended up doing is started trying to use the predictions that are given by our system about when the phase is going to end, over repeated executions, and then using that as a way of deciding that, okay, now it's time to commit to this as an end time and give away flexibility. So that sometimes is going to give you the effect of you'll get a countdown and then it'll raise up a little bit and then keep going. But as long as it doesn't go the other direction, I think we're okay. But,
So,
right.
So great talk, Steve. So
Yeah.
First question is, when are you going to bring this to Washington, D.C., of course? But the second question is, what about, I'm not sure if you tackled this in your talk, emergency personnel, responses, everything from that to severe weather, horse and buggy, you name it, pelotons, parades. Do you worry about these things?
Oh, yeah, for sure. Actually, well, we think of two kinds of, or different levels of preemption, but emergency vehicle is pretty easy to accommodate because, they can unconditionally get the road, basically, and in that case, we're just trying to minimize the time we need to recover after they move through. But we are looking at the idea of sort of anticipating if they give us their route, then we can be more maybe effective about trying to clear traffic out of their way ahead of time, which is something that an emergency system wouldn't do now. But so there are some opportunities in that space. Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah.
Good.
Hi, I'm Carrie Wagstaff from the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, and your work and your results are extremely impressive, I have to say, from a real-world deployment and being able to measure the reduction in all of these costs that you already have. So I'm curious, before we had stoplights, we had the traffic cop, right? The human standing in the intersection, directing the traffic manually. So I wonder if you've thought about using your camera to observe a traffic cop in action and see, what is the upper bound on what you could reduce those wait times if you really had a human presence there? And are you getting close to that? Is there a lot to improve on still, or are you already there?
Well, interesting story. When we first deployed our system, the traffic cop, it was a bicycle traffic cop who had the practice of coming every day at rush hour and taking over the lights. And we could never figure out why our performance degraded so much at that part of the day. And finally we watched the videos and started seeing what was happening and convinced them to give it a try without. But I guess I'm not sure this was the question you were asking, but it's very difficult for humans to. I mean, if it's an isolated intersection, that's one thing because you've got purview of the whole thing. But if you're trying to move traffic in a network, you make decisions that look nice or look good to you myopically, but are not are having these cascading downstream effects. So I'm not sure if it's a good that's a good barometer or benchmark for for gauging how well we're doing.
Thanks.
Yeah.
So first, I just want to say I live in Pittsburgh, so it's kind of nice to finally see what those cameras are for on all those intersections. But I'm wondering, as you mentioned that as you get more connected vehicles, the performance increases. I mean, is there a point where you have too much information that the optimization problem becomes so hard that it's not even worth it? Is there a point of diminishing returns of having all these connected devices?
Well, I mean, I guess, there's always a problem of sort of filtering data and getting the right amount of data, getting data that you can manage. But I guess I would prefer to think about it more optimistically than pessimistically, that as you get more information, well, I lost my train of thought. That what were you saying that it would? Is
there a point of diminishing returns with too much information that the optimization problems just become too
hard?
Yeah,
no, I guess what I was going to say is that if you think of it optimistically from the standpoint of each additional piece of information you get about another vehicle, you're squeezing more and more uncertainty about what's going to happen, then you're actually, I don't know, you should be getting, your asymptote should be the,
yeah,
got
but then
perfect
it could
information.
morph into some really complicated planning problem at that point, right? When you know all the information,
yeah,
you're just trying to find the optimal solution. Just something to think about.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I'm sure there's a point, yeah.
Steve, great talk. I'm wondering if it's useful to make use of what might be called calendar information. For example, you know that there's a Steeler game coming up at 8 o'clock on Tuesday night, and accommodating traffic for that, or you know that the game is about to let out, and so you clear the path for all the hordes of people who are going to be coming forward. Have you looked at that, or is that useful?
Well, it's certainly a useful idea. We haven't done too much of that, but there are circumstances where, I mean, the Steeler game is a great example. They actually change the directions of the roads, when that happens. So, in some way, you have to react to it, or else you're sending traffic the wrong way down right. roads or something like that. So, but even in conventional techniques, a city might have a plan for a Steeler game, and they'll plug that in on that day or something right. like that. But yeah, I think there's a lot more that could be done with context in general.
I think the advantage would be that you could anticipate that you were going to reach near saturation, and so deal with that before the flow becomes, nonlinear, essentially.
Yeah.
Great.
Good.
Hey Steve. So my question is about kind of generating negative feedback loops when you providing information to systems that are planning routes. So if you're, obviously if they all take your advice, then you're going to go from one bottleneck point to another, and you're not actually going to be saving any time. So how do you think that you would deal with that in terms of providing the information and also from the recipient's perspective to utilize that information?
That's a great question. I guess we think of it as, if you think about the communication that you're having with multiple vehicles, fundamentally it's going to be an incremental problem. So if you give advice to one, then the next one who gets the advice says there's a new setting to give the advice. So it's hard to go back and tell the last guy that, no, do this now. So you're always optimizing with respect to what your current state is. So there is a limit to that, I think. But yeah. Okay, maybe two more. Yeah.
One last question. They have to prep the next session in here.
What's that?
One last question. They need to prep. They need this room.
Okay, great. Hi, Ray.
What happens in winter or bad conditions?
It snows. It depends a lot on your detection. Like we have in different parts of our network cameras and radar, and radar is a little less sensitive to weather, but you can in a blizzard or a downpour of rain even you go blind for a while. We try to always, if we can detect that we're out of contact, we do this both with the detection and the communication. We try to roll back and use our immediate history as you know, as sort of a guideline pattern. But admittedly, that's you know, that can only work for a little while, and so forth. It is nice that well, one thing that's nice about the decentralized, I guess this is more for the communication, but the decentralized is that you can lose it in one direction, but you know, you still are integrating information from 3 other directions. And in some sense, the cameras are all pointed in different directions too. So we do track vehicles as they leave the intersections also. So there's no good solution, but yeah. It's an interesting. That'll also go away maybe if vehicles become connected. Anyway, thank you.